The first thing I heard when I came out of the anesthetic was silence. Not the beeping of monitors or the squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum. I mean the particular silence of being in a room and realizing, very slowly, that the person who was supposed to be there is not. My name is Laurel. I am 34 years old, and I am a forensic accountant. I spent my days helping the Canada Revenue Agency trace money that people with very good lawyers had worked very hard to make disappear. I was good at my job, terrifyingly good, some of my colleagues said. I could look at a balance sheet the way other people read a novel, sensing the twist before it arrived, feeling the faint drags of something wrong 3 pages before anyone else noticed. I was completely blind to what was happening in my own home. I had gone into surgery at 7 in the morning for what my doctor described as an urgent but straightforward procedure. My appendix had ruptured overnight, which the attending physician at Toronto General explained with the same casual tone someone might use to describe a delayed subway. Serious but fixable. My husband had kissed me forehead in the pre-op room, told me he loved me, told me he would be in the waiting area the whole time. That was the last honest thing he ever said to me. I woke up at 11:30 to an empty chair. A nurse told me my husband had stepped out to grab lunch. He would be back shortly. I nodded and stared at the water-stained ceilings tiles and thought about nothing in particular, the way you do when your body has been chemically convinced to slow down. An hour passed. Then another. The anesthetic fog lifted and in its place came a low, creeping dread I did not yet have a name for. He arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. I heard him before I saw him, that particular low laugh, easy and indulgent, the one he used when he was trying to charm someone. I turned my head toward the curtain, and then I heard the second voice. It was my younger sister. She was talking about parking, about how brutal the parking fees were at this hospital, about how she had practically had to remortgage her condo just to leave her car in the structure for 2 hours. She was wearing her good coat, the camel-colored wool one our parents had bought her for her birthday, and she was walking half a step ahead of my husband, her hand looped through his arm. She did not look like a woman visiting her recovering sister. She looked like a woman arriving somewhere she belonged. My husband pulled the curtain aside and stopped when he saw me awake. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt, exactly, more like recalibration. Then he smiled, that practiced smile I had watched him use at business dinners for 7 years. "You're up," he said. "Good. How do you feel?" I looked past him at my sister. She was already scrolling through her phone. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice came out rough, scraped hollow from the breathing tube. "I had to handle a few things at the office," he said, pulling up a chair, not beside the bed, but slightly back from it, as though maintaining a buffer zone. You know how Bay Street gets on a Thursday. He had been away from my bedside for 6 hours. Bay Street was 20 minutes from the hospital. My sister finally looked up from her phone. She glanced at me the way you might glance at a mildly interesting piece of furniture. Then she turned to my husband with an expression of theatrical exhaustion. "Can we speed this up?" she said. "I have a dinner reservation at 7 and I still need to get my hair done." I stared at the woman who had sat across from me at every Christmas table for 32 years. The woman I had helped move into 3 separate apartments, loaned money to without keeping count, defended to every person who said she was spoiled, which she was, which I had always refused to see. "You need to get your hair done," I repeated. "It's not a big deal, Laurel." She said my name with a little sigh attached to it, the way she had always said my name, like I was being tedious. "You're fine. The surgery went fine. You're awake. I don't know why you're making that face." Before I could respond, my parents appeared in the doorway. My mother saw my sister first. She crossed the recovery bay in 4 steps and wrapped her arms around her as though my sister was the one who had just been through surgery. My father followed, nodding at my husband with the particular warmth he reserved for men he respected, which meant men who made more money than he did. "How is she?" my mother said to my husband, not to me. He shrugged with both hands. "She just woke up. She seems a bit disoriented." "I'm right here," I said. My mother finally looked over. "You should rest," she said. "Don't try to talk too much. Your sister drove all the way from Rosedale to be here, you know, in traffic." Rosedale is 20 minutes from Toronto General. I had just had emergency surgery after nearly dying, and my mother was thanking my sister for her commute. The charge nurse appeared at the edge of the curtain and cleared her throat. "We do have a 2-visitum policy for recovery. It's a bit tight in here." My sister pulled her coat tighter and looked at the nurse as though she had been personally offended. "We're immediate family," she said. "All of us." "Yes, I understand. The policy applies regardless." "Do you know who my brother-in-law is?" my sister said. Her voice had taken on that pitch she used when she felt an institution was failing to recognize her importance. He manages a fund on Bay Street," the nurse said evenly, "and this is a recovery ward." My sister looked at my husband looked at my father looked at my mother, none of them looked at me. My mother turned to me with the bright, decisive expression she wore when she had made up her mind about something that did not actually involve her. "Darling, your sister is exhausted. She was up late last night worrying. Would you mind if we took your husband and your father down to the cafe? You should sleep anyway." I was the patient, this was my hospital room. They were proposing to leave me alone so that my sister, who had arrived at 2 in the afternoon in traffic from Rosedale, could rest. I said nothing, something was wrong, and I had not yet understood the full shape of it. My friend Daphne arrived at 4. She came in fast and quiet, the way she moved in courtrooms, no wasted motion. She is a family lawyer in private practice and she has known me since our first year at the University of Toronto. She set a tea on my bedside table, looked me over once and said, "Where is he?" "Cafe," I said, "with my family." She nodded slowly. The way she nodded told me she had already started constructing something in her head. "He left his coat on the chair," I said. Daphne looked at the chair. His charcoal wool coat was folded over the back of it, and his phone was in the inside breast pocket, the corner of it just visible above the fabric. He had a habit of leaving his phone in his coat instead of his trouser pocket. He had always said it ruined the line of his suits. Daphne reached into the pocket and pulled out the phone. She looked at me. "He uses the same passcode," I said, "our wedding date." She unlocked it without hesitating. She scrolled for less than 30 seconds, and then she handed it to me without saying a word. The messages were in a thread with my sister. I will not describe every line of them here, because some things do not need to be preserved in detail. What I can tell you is that they had been together for just over a year, that they had discussed me with a level of contempt that took my breath away, not in the dramatic way that phrase usually means, but literally, like a small collapse of the lungs. And buried in the thread sent 4 days ago was a message from my husband that I read 3 times before it settled. "Once she's out of surgery and on meds, it'll be easier to document the instability. We move forward with the application end of next week. By the time she figures out the accounts, it's done." The accounts. I handed the phone back to Daphne. I asked her to put it exactly where she had found it. Then I asked her to hand me my own phone. I opened my banking application. I navigated to our joint TFSA. The balance was $11.43. 4 days ago, it had held $380,000, a decade of consistent contributions. My salary increases, my performance bonuses, the years I had lived below my means so that we would have a foundation that could not easily be disturbed. He had cleared it in a single wire transfer on the morning I went into pre-op, while I was being wheeled down a corridor in a hospital gown, focused entirely on not being afraid. I put my phone face down on the blanket. Daphne watched me. She did not offer comfort, which was exactly right. "How long do I have?" I asked, thinking out loud. "Probably until he realizes the phone's been touched," she said, "which means before he comes back from the cafe." I nodded. "Long enough." Here's what my husband did not understand about me, because he had spent 7 years treating my career as a comfortable but unremarkable government-adjacent job. Forensic accountants do not simply add up numbers. We follow money the way a wildlife biologist follows migration patterns, reading the traces, mapping the routes, identifying the moment something veered off its natural course. I had spent 11 years helping the CRA build criminal cases against people who were very, very good at hiding things. My husband had moved $380,000 through what looked, on the surface, like a standard inter-account transfer. To him, that was sophisticated. To me, it was a trail with the lights left on. I told Daphne to go to the cafe and find a reason to keep him occupied for 20 minutes. She stood up, buttoned her coat, and left without argument. I made 3 phone calls. By the time my husband returned to the recovery bay, I was lying with my eyes half closed, looking exactly like a woman who had just had surgery and was quietly recovering. He picked up his coat, checked his phone with a fast, involuntary glance. I saw his shoulders drop slightly when he found it untouched, and told me he would be back in the morning. He left. My sister left with him. My parents stayed 11 more minutes, during which my father mentioned that my husband was under enormous pressure at work, and that I should try not to add to it when I got home. Then they left too. Daphne came back in and sat down. "Tell me everything," she said. I was discharged 2 days later with a prescription, a set of post-operative instructions, and a clarity of mind that the surgery had, in some strange way, accelerated. Pain has that effect sometimes. It strips away the ambient noise and leaves you with only what actually matters. Daphne arranged for me to stay at her house in Leslieville while I recovered. The spare room had good light and a door that locked. The second night, when I was well enough to sit upright for more than an hour, I opened my laptop and went to work. My husband managed a boutique wealth fund on Bay Street. He catered to high-net-worth clients, surgeons, retired executives, a few old-money families who had gone to the same private schools and trusted each other's recommendations with a passivity I had always found alarming. His fund was small by Bay Street standards, but he wore its success like an identity rather than a tool. I pulled his fund's publicly filed documents first: annual returns, management expense ratios, quarterly distributions to investors. Then I cross-referenced them against the CIA database I maintained access to through my professional designation. The numbers did not match. They did not match in a way that told a very specific story. The reported returns were consistently 4 to 6 percentage points above what the underlying assets could reasonably have generated. The distribution payments to his older investors were, in several cases, funded not by actual portfolio gains but by capital from newer investors. The math was not complicated. The math was, in fact, the oldest and most uncreative financial crime in existence. My husband was running a Ponzi scheme on Bay Street. I sat with that for a moment, then I kept pulling threads. The wire transfer that had emptied our TFSA had gone to a numbered company in Ontario, 2291 Holdings Inc., registered in Delaware, administered through a proxy service out of a strip mall in Mississauga. At first glance, it looked like a shell built to obscure asset movement before a divorce filing. Standard, if cruel. But 2291 Holdings Inc. had a secondary transaction on its ledger that caught my attention: a property transfer filed 10 days ago with the Ontario Land Registry Office. The title to our house in Leaside, the one I had spent 3 years renovating, the one with the kitchen I had designed down to the cabinet pulls, had been moved into 2291 Holdings Inc. He had quit-claimed it himself, removing both our names from the deed and placing the house inside a corporate shell he believed was completely anonymous. I smiled, which surprised me. 3 years ago, I had purchased a numbered company from a bankrupt client. The company, 2291 Holdings Inc., had been part of the asset sale. I had acquired it for the cost of the administrative transfer fee, intending to use it as a holding vehicle for a property investment that never materialized. I had kept it active, paying the annual Ontario Business Registry renewal fee, which was less than $300 a year. The company had sat dormant on my professional records, unremarkable, invisible. My husband had gone to a proxy broker looking for an off-the-shelf numbered company to hide our house. He was in a hurry because the divorce filing was coming, and he needed the transfer executed before I could contest it. The broker had found him the first available Ontario-registered numbered company with a clean history. He had transferred our house into my company. I asked the woman at the proxy service to confirm the registered director of 2291 Holdings Inc. She read back my name without a flicker of surprise. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat for a long moment in Daphne's spare room, listening to the espresso machine running in the kitchen below. Then I went downstairs and told her to start drafting the settlement. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, served to me outside the Metro on Danforth Avenue at 9 in the morning by a process server in a Canada Goose jacket, who said my name too loudly and handed me the envelope with the faintly aggressive satisfaction of someone who enjoys his job. I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and read through the petition in about 12 minutes. He was seeking sole ownership of all assets held by 2291 Holdings Inc., which included our house. He was claiming I had hidden assets in the numbered company to obstruct disclosure, and he was requesting a court order to reverse the property transfer. He was also seeking, and I had to read this paragraph twice, spousal support. His filing claimed that the emotional toll of managing my medical emergency had caused him significant psychological distress, impairing his capacity to manage his fund. He was requesting $4,000 a month. He was asking me to pay him $4,000 a month for the trauma of being a bad husband while I was in surgery. I folded the papers back into the envelope. I walked to the coffee shop on the corner, sat down with a tea, and called Daphne. "Tell me about page 5, I said. "Page 5, she said, and I could hear the particular precision in her voice that she reserved for the best parts of a case, "is the kill shot. If he signs it without reading it, he is confessing in writing, under penalty of perjury, to unilaterally transferring marital assets into an offshore vehicle without my client's knowledge or consent. He is permanently waiving any claim to property held by 2291 Holdings, Inc. And he is certifying that all liabilities connected to his fund's investment operations are solely his responsibility." We needed him to sign without reading it, which meant we needed him to believe he had already won. I sent a text to a woman in my neighborhood, someone who had known both of us socially for years, and who I had long understood to report interesting information to my sister within the hour. I made the text sound desperate. I said I had no money, no fight left, that I just wanted it to be over, that I would give him whatever he wanted if I could just keep my grandmother's rings. I pressed send and put my phone face down on the cafe table. Daphne received the signed settlement 4 days later. He had initialed every tab without pausing. The land registry office on Yonge Street was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. The clerk who processed my corporate officer update and title confirmation was a methodical woman who read through the binder I had prepared with the focused attention of someone who took filing very seriously. "The property was transferred into 2291 Holdings, Inc., she said, scrolling through her screen, "and you're listed as sole director and registered officer." "I have been since I acquired the company 3 years ago," I confirmed. She looked up over her reading glasses. "Did the transferring party know you controlled this company?" "He was in a hurry," I said. She studied me for a moment longer than was strictly professional. Then she stamped the documents, signed her initials, and slid the certified copies across the counter. I owned my house. I owned it because my husband, in his haste to leave me homeless, had transferred it directly into a company I had owned for 3 years. And then, 2 days later, he had signed a legal settlement explicitly confirming that he held no claim to any property within 2291 Holdings, Inc. He had wrapped his own financial life around a tree and walked away thinking he had caused the damage to me. I filed the complaint to the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, and the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit on the same afternoon. I picked up the land registry papers. Daphne submitted the signed settlement, which was his written confession, as the primary document. I attached the fund's financial records, the wire transfer trail, and the distribution ledger I had reconstructed from his client's tax filings. 11 years of forensic work had taught me that the people who review these things appreciate when the narrative is clean. I did not warn my parents. Daphne had asked me the night before I filed whether I wanted to. My parents had, over the previous 2 weeks, provided a sworn affidavit to my husband's legal team in which they described a pattern of erratic behavior on my part. They claimed I had experienced a mental breakdown at the hospital, that I had made wild accusations and threatened my husband in the presence of hospital staff, and that they were genuinely concerned about my psychological fitness. They had done this at his request, because he had told them I was trying to destroy him out of spite, and because they believed him, and because believing him cost them nothing. Or so they thought. My parents had invested a significant portion of their retirement savings, their RRSPs, the equity from the house in Scarborough, into my husband's fund. He had offered them preferred rates and early access to distributions. He had spent Christmas dinner every year talking about yield curves and principal protection and the particular genius of his strategy. My father had told me, during one of these dinners, that my husband was the most financially astute person he had ever met. He had not meant this as a compliment to me. I filed the report. The charity auction was my sister's idea. I learned about it through the same acquaintance I had used to send the false surrender text. She mentioned it with the barely suppressed excitement of someone who knows they are carrying detonator-grade information. My husband and my sister were hosting a fundraising gala at the Granite Club in mid-November. It was framed as a charity event, proceeds to a hospital foundation, which I found almost beautiful in its audacity, and it was also, based on the invitations circulating through their social circle, an occasion to launch this next round of investor recruitment for his fund. He was going to pitch a platinum portfolio to Toronto's upper middle class at a charity gala, using stolen money to fund the canapes, while a warrant was being drafted for his arrest. I went to my closet at Daphne's and pulled out the black dress I had bought for a colleague's retirement dinner 3 months ago. I put on the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me, which were in my jewelry box, because Daphne had retrieved them from my hospital bedside table. I put on my good coat. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had been through something significant and had come through it. Daphne wore her navy litigation blazer. She carried the portfolio. The Granite Club's main ballroom was warm and gold-lit and smelled of cedar and expensive candles. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with trays of wine and small plates of things that cost more than most people's hourly wage. My sister stood near the bar in a burgundy dress I recognized. It had been in a shopping bag on our kitchen counter the previous autumn. Part of a haul, she said, was for a work event. My husband had paid for it, with, I now understood, money from his clients' retirement accounts. She saw me the moment I crossed the threshold. The color left her face in a single, clean pull, like a tablecloth being yanked. My mother appeared from somewhere near the hors d'oeuvres table and positioned herself in my path with the practiced obstruction of a woman who had spent decades managing social disasters. She grabbed my arm above the elbow. "You need to leave," she said, low and absolutely furious. "You are not on the guest list. You are going to embarrass this family." I looked at her hand on my arm. I thought of the affidavit she had signed. I thought of the woman she had described in it, unstable, erratic, a danger to herself. I thought of how little it had cost her to write those things about her own daughter, and how much it was about to cost her. "Let go of my arm," I said. She did not let go, so I peeled her fingers back, one at a time, slowly enough that several people nearby noticed, and I walked toward the stage. The room arranged itself around me, the way rooms sometimes do, when the person moving through them carries something the room cannot quite identify. My sister was moving toward me from the right, my husband from the left, both wearing the expression of people who have realized too late that they have misread the situation entirely. I reached the microphone first. "Good evening," I said. The room quieted with the speed of people who sense that something unexpected is about to happen. "Thank you all for being here. Before the auction begins, I wanted to share a few things about the fund you may be considering investing in tonight." My husband said my name from the floor. His voice had an edge in it I recognized, the controlled version of something much less controlled. "3 weeks ago," I said, "I was in surgery at Toronto General. While I was in the operating room, my husband transferred $380,000 from our joint tax-free savings account to an offshore holding company. He did this at 8:42 in the morning. My surgery began at 8:15. I paused. He timed it for when I was under anaesthetic." The room had gone very still. "I am a forensic accountant," I continued. "I spent 11 years working with the CRA on financial crime cases. So when I tell you that his fund's reported returns cannot be reconciled with the underlying assets, that the distributions he has been paying to his existing investors are coming from the capital contributions of his newest investors, I want you to understand that I am not making a guess. I am telling you what the documents say." My husband surged forward. "Don't listen to her," he said, loud enough for the whole room. "She is not well. She just had surgery. She has been making these accusations for weeks because she is trying to destroy me." He grabbed my arm. Daphne stepped in from the side so quickly that several people flinched. "Touch her again," she said, quiet and very clear, "and I will have you charged with assault before the RCMP gets here." He dropped my arm. "The RCMP," someone in the crowd said. On cue, not because we had staged it, but because the complaint had been filed 10 days ago and investigations do not pause for gala schedules. The doors at the back of the Granite Club opened. 4 officers, 2 in RCMP jackets and 2 in plain clothes from the OSC's Enforcement Division, moved through the room with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this many times before. The lead officer read the warrant in a voice calibrated for the room's acoustics. My husband stood on the stage beside me and did not move. He had the look of a man whose plan, so carefully constructed, had just revealed the shape of the thing it was actually building all along. My sister ran. She made it approximately 12 feet toward the side exit before an OSC officer stepped into her path. She had used the transferred funds to purchase 2 items that were currently in her possession at the club, a bracelet she was wearing on her wrist, and a designer bag she had set on a chair near the bar. Both would be seized as proceeds of crime before she reached the lobby. My parents stood by the hors d'oeuvres table. My father was holding a glass of wine he had apparently forgotten to put down. My mother had both hands pressed flat against her sternum. They watched the officers lead my husband toward the exit, and I saw the moment my father understood, not the fraud itself, but the specific, personal cost of it to them. He had crossed the room by the time he said my name. "Laurel," my father said, "the fund." "Your RSPs," I said. He nodded. "And the equity from the house in Scarborough," I said. He nodded again. He looked, suddenly, much older than he had at Christmas dinner when he had told me my husband was the most financially astute person he had ever met. My mother took hold of my arm, not the grabbing way from earlier. This was the way she had held my arm when I was small, and she was trying to keep me close in a crowd. "We didn't know," she said. "About what he was doing, we didn't know." "I know," I said. "You have the house," my father said. "You have assets, we don't have anything left. We're going to lose the Scarborough house." I looked at him, I looked at my mother, I thought of the affidavit. I thought of the specific language they had used, erratic, unstable, a danger to herself, and how little hesitation there had been, according to Daphne's contacts at the courthouse, in the signing of it. I thought of my sister in her burgundy dress, and my husband laughing in the corridor outside my hospital room, and the 12 minutes I had spent in the pre-op bay that morning trying not to be afraid, while he was already planning which account to drain first. "I know," I said again. I took my mother's hand off my arm gently. I picked up my bag from beside the microphone stand. I nodded once to Daphne, who was already closing the portfolio. "Good night," I said to both of them. I walked out of the Granite Club into the November air, which was sharp and clean and smelled faintly of snow coming. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see the lights of the ballroom and the shapes of people moving, some toward the exit, some standing very still, some already on their phones. The auction would not happen tonight. The fund had been frozen by the time the officers read the second page of the warrant. Whatever my husband had promised his guests would remain for a very long time, exactly that. 6 months after that evening at the Granite Club, Daphne and I signed the lease on an office in Corktown, 3 blocks from the courthouse. Forensic accounting and family law, which turned out to be a combination this city needed more than it had realized. Our first retainer came through an OSC referral. Our second through a woman who had spent 3 years certain that her husband's business manager was stealing from their joint accounts, but could not find anyone who understood how to prove it. We proved it in 11 days. My husband is awaiting trial. The charges under the criminal code carry a maximum of 14 years. His legal fees have consumed what remained of his personal assets. My sister accepted a conditional sentence and is prohibited from traveling outside Ontario until her reporting conditions expire. My parents lost the Scarborough house. They rent now, in Oshawa. My mother called me once about a month after the gala. She did not apologize. She asked me whether I thought I was being fair. I told her that fairness was an interesting framework, given what she had signed, and that I wished her well. That was the last conversation we had. I sit at the kitchen table in the house in Leaside on Sunday mornings with coffee and case files, in a room that is mine, not because I won it, but because my husband, in his absolute certainty that I was too boring and too predictable to understand what he was doing, handed it to me himself and signed the confirmation. People spend a great deal of time being afraid of the wrong things. They are afraid of confrontation, afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of the moment when the room goes quiet and everyone looks at them. They are not, usually, afraid of the woman across the table who has spent 11 years learning how to follow money through the dark. They should be a little more afraid of that. Daphne comes over on Tuesday evenings. We sit with tea and whatever is currently on our desks and talk about the cases the way we used to talk about our professors in first year, with a directness that would have seemed harsh from the outside, but was, between us, just clarity. That is what the people who matter look like. Not the ones who were there when things were easy. The ones who pull up a chair when things are very nearly finished and say, simply, "Tell me everything."